August 5th, 2025 went down as one of the most troubling execution dates in Tennessee history. That's when Byron Black, after nearly 4 decades on death row, met his end through lethal injection.
The state of Tennessee executed Byron Black. Black was sentenced to death for the 1988 murders of Angela Clay and her 2 young daughters, LaToya and Lakeisha, in Nashville.
I witnessed today's execution firsthand, which was the state's second under the new death penalty protocol.
A 69-year-old man with a heart device strapped to a gurney, audibly suffering as chemicals flowed through his body. The state had ignored pleas to deactivate his defibrillator, potentially turning his execution into prolonged agony. But here's what makes this story even more complex. Prosecutors were literally fighting each other over whether Black should even be executed at all. Some argued he was too intellectually disabled to face the death penalty. We're about to unpack the entire Byron Black saga, from a horrific triple murder in 1988 that destroyed a family, through decades of courtroom drama, to those final disturbing minutes that have everyone asking, where's the line between justice and cruelty? This is Criminal Tapes. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel. Your support goes a long way to help us get you all of these stories that matter. The Byron Black execution represents far more than just another death penalty case. It's the conclusion of what became one of Tennessee's most drawn-out and divisive capital punishment battles, stretching across nearly 40 years. What set this case apart wasn't just its duration, but the extraordinary legal chaos it created. In an almost unheard-of scenario, Davidson County's own District Attorney Glenn Funk broke ranks with state prosecutors, publicly declaring that Black shouldn't be executed due to intellectual disability. Meanwhile, Tennessee's Attorney General fought tooth and nail to carry out the death sentence, creating a legal battlefield where government lawyers were essentially at war with each other. The medical drama added another layer of complexity. Black's implanted heart device became the center of heated courtroom battles, with his defense team warning that the defibrillator could cause excruciating pain during the lethal injection process. Courts issued conflicting orders about whether to deactivate it, ultimately leaving the device active during his execution. At the heart of everything were persistent questions about Black's mental capacity, claims that he had the intellectual functioning of someone far below the threshold for execution eligibility. To understand how we reached this controversial endpoint, we need to travel back to a tragic night in Nashville during the spring of 1988. So let's talk about how this whole nightmare started. Back in 1988, we had Angela Clay, a 29-year-old mom just trying to make it work after separating from her husband, Benny. She's got 2 little girls, 9-year-old LaToya and 6-year-old Lakeisha. And she's dating this guy named Byron Black. And honestly, that relationship was probably the worst decision she ever made. Here's the thing about Byron Black. He wasn't exactly what you'd call stable. 2 years before these murders, he'd already shown his true colors when he got into it with Angela's estranged husband. That argument, it ended with Black shooting Benny Clay in the shoulder. So yeah, we're talking about a guy who was already willing to pull a gun over relationship drama. Black got convicted for that shooting and sentenced to 2 years in prison. But here's where the system really failed. They gave him work release. Basically, he could leave prison during the day for work and come back at night. I mean, what could go wrong with that arrangement, right? Well, March 28, 1988 is when we found out exactly what could go wrong. Angela and her girls were just having a normal evening at their Nashville apartment on Wade Avenue, but Black had apparently discovered that Angela was thinking about getting back together with her husband, and that just sent him over the edge. So he uses his work release freedom to show up at Angela's place that night, and what happens next is just absolutely brutal. Black starts in the master bedroom where Angela's sleeping. She never even saw it coming. He just shoots her once in the head while she's lying there. She's gone within minutes, completely defenseless. But he doesn't stop there. 9-year-old LaToya was also in that bedroom, and Black turns the gun on this little girl. He shoots her in the neck and chest from about 2 feet away. Can you imagine? This child had to watch her mother get killed, and then she becomes the next target. LaToya suffered for several minutes before she died. Now here's the part that really gets to me. 6-year-old Lakeisha was in another bedroom, and the evidence shows she knew something terrible was happening. This little girl actually tried to fight back against a grown man with a gun. The forensics team found defensive wounds, which means she was trying to protect herself. Black shot her twice, once in the chest, once in the pelvis, from less than a foot away. And get this, she didn't die right away. This 6-year-old spent anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes bleeding to death, all alone, probably wondering why this was happening to her. The bodies weren't found until the next day, when Angela's family got worried and came to check on them. I can't even imagine walking into that scene. Now you'd think with a triple murder like this there'd be tons of evidence pointing to the killer, right? Actually, no. There wasn't much physical evidence tying Black to the scene. But investigators got lucky with one crucial piece of evidence. The bullets. When they ran ballistics on the bullets from all 3 victims, guess what they matched? The same gun Black had used to shoot Angela's husband 2 years earlier. The same shooting that had landed him in prison with those work release privileges in the first place. That ballistics match was basically game over for Black. On April 23, 1988, he was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, and by December, prosecutors had made it clear they were going for the death penalty. This was the crime that would keep Byron Black on death row for the next 37 years. When Byron Black's trial kicked off in February 1989, he stuck to his story. Complete denial. Even with that ballistics evidence staring him in the face, Black maintained he was innocent. His defense team tried to build an alibi, and get this. At one point, Black actually claimed he had found the bodies himself. Yeah, he tried to paint himself as some kind of good Samaritan who just happened to discover the crime scene. The audacity is just incredible. The jury wasn't having any of it. On March 8, 1989, they came back with guilty verdicts on all 3 murder charges. And here's something that'll give you chills. That date was supposed to be Lakeisha's 7th birthday. Her dad, Benny Clay, said the guilty verdict was the best birthday present his little girl could have gotten. When it came to sentencing, things got interesting. The jury unanimously agreed Black should die for killing Lakeisha, but they couldn't reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty for Angela and LaToya's murders. So Judge Walter Kurtz sentenced Black to death for the 6-year-old's murder and gave him 2 life sentences for the other killings, plus extra time for burglary and gun charges. Then began what can only be described as a legal marathon. For the next 3 decades, Black's lawyers filed appeal after appeal, and honestly, they threw everything at the wall to see what would stick. Tennessee Supreme Court shot him down in 1991. Court of Criminal Appeals rejected him in 95, 99, and 2005. Federal courts said no in 2008, 2013, and 2017. Finally, in 2018, even the U.S. Supreme Court told him he was done. But then 2022 rolled around, and something wild happened. Black filed a new appeal claiming intellectual disability, which normally wouldn't be that unusual. What was unusual? The local district attorney, Glenn Funk, actually agreed with him. Think about that. The same office that originally prosecuted Black was now saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't execute this guy because he's intellectually disabled. This created this bizarre situation where you had local prosecutors fighting against the state attorney general's office. Funk was basically saying, we got it wrong, this man shouldn't die, while the state AG was pushing full steam ahead with the execution. Despite this unprecedented prosecutorial support, the courts weren't buying it. Judge Walter Kurtz, the same judge who originally sentenced Black, rejected the appeal in March 2022. The Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals backed him up in June 2023. COVID had thrown some wrenches into the timeline, causing delays and stays, but by 2025, Black had officially run out of legal options. After 37 years of appeals, motions, and legal maneuvering, the state of Tennessee was finally ready to carry out his death sentence. The stage was set for what would become one of the most controversial executions in recent memory. As Black's August 5th execution date got closer, his lawyers made one last desperate move that nobody saw coming. They went to court over his pacemaker. Yeah, you heard that right. Black had this implanted cardioverter defibrillator in his chest, basically a device that would shock his heart back to life if it stopped beating. His legal team argued that during the lethal injection, this thing would keep trying to restart his heart over and over again, essentially torturing him to death. On July 3rd, they filed papers asking the court to force prison officials to turn off the device before killing him. What followed was this crazy back-and-forth legal battle that honestly felt like watching a tennis match. First, Nashville Chancellor Russell Perkins said, "Yeah, turn off the device, but I can't stop the execution." Then 3 days later, he changed his mind and said the device should be deactivated at a hospital the morning of the execution instead of at the prison. But then the Tennessee Supreme Court stepped in and basically said, nope, ordering us to turn off that device is the same as delaying the execution, and you don't have that authority. So they let the execution move forward, with the heart device still active. Even the local hospital refused to get involved. Meanwhile, Black was striking out everywhere else, too. The Tennessee Supreme Court shot down his request for a new competency hearing on July 8th. On July 11th, he asked Governor Bill Lee for clemency, basically his last shot at avoiding execution. On August 4th, the day before he was supposed to die, Lee said no. Hours later, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeal. Game over. While all this legal drama was playing out, the victims' families were making their feelings crystal clear. Lynette Bell, Angela's sister, was fed up with what she called the defense's tactical ploys to delay justice. Angela's 88-year-old mother, Marie Bell, said she wanted to see Black executed before she died because she'd already waited too long for justice. Even Benny Clay, the girl's father, said he'd forgiven Black, but was still planning to watch the execution. So August 5th arrives, and Black goes through the typical death row routine. He attends a church service in his cell that morning, trying to find some peace before the end. At 4:45 a.m., he sits down for his last meal, and honestly, his choices were pretty ordinary. Pizza with mushrooms and sausage, some donuts, and butter pecan ice cream. Not exactly what you'd expect for someone's final meal, but there you have it. By the time they wheeled Black into the execution chamber at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, he was a shell of his former self. This 69-year-old man was in a wheelchair, dealing with dementia, brain damage, kidney failure, and heart problems. He was nothing like the violent man who had killed that family 37 years earlier. The execution setup was Tennessee's new single drug protocol, just pentobarbital delivered through IV lines. Black got strapped to the gurney, covered with a sheet, with those IV lines running into his arms. The witnesses gathered behind the glass, including family members and his spiritual advisor, Reverend Monica Coakley. When that curtain opened around 10:33 a.m., things started going wrong almost immediately. Within 2 minutes, Black was clearly in distress. You could hear him sighing heavily, breathing hard, and he kept lifting his head off the gurney. That's not supposed to happen. The pentobarbital should knock you out instantly. Then came the moment that's going to haunt everyone who was there. Black looked at Reverend Coakley and said, "This is hurting so bad." The Reverend tried to comfort him, saying, "I'm so sorry, just listen to my voice." And she started singing to him. But here's the thing. The execution team was having problems from the start. They couldn't find good veins in Black's arms, and according to his lawyer, there was blood pooling on his right side. It took them about 10 minutes just to get the IV lines properly inserted. When they asked Black for any final words before starting the procedure, he just said, "No, sir." Simple as that. At 10:43 a.m., about 10 minutes after the injection began, and after Black had cried out in pain, they pronounced him dead. The reactions afterward? Well, they couldn't have been more different depending on which side you were on. Lynette Bell, Angela's sister, didn't hold back. She released a statement saying she thanked God the execution finally happened, and she pointed out that Black's family was now going through what her family had endured for 37 years. But what really got to her was Black's silence. "I can't say I'm sorry because we never got an apology. He never apologized and he never admitted it," she said. Even at the very end, Black never took responsibility for what he'd done. Bell was also pretty ticked off about all the last-minute legal moves, calling them tactical games designed to prevent justice. After waiting nearly 4 decades, she saw the defense's concerns about Black's suffering as irrelevant compared to what her family had been through. On the flip side, Black's attorney, Kelly Henry, was absolutely furious. This woman had represented Black for 25 years, and she was fighting back tears as she condemned what she'd just witnessed. She called Black a gentle, kind, fragile, intellectually disabled man who had been executed simply because they could. Henry raised some serious red flags about the medical side of things, too. She pointed out that Black being able to lift his head and express pain meant the pentobarbital wasn't working like it was supposed to. The fact that he was able to raise his head several times and express pain tells you that the pentobarbital was not acting the way the state's experts claim it acts, she argued. In her words, Black had been tortured. The contrast was stark, one family finally getting closure, while the other side saw it as state-sanctioned cruelty. Black's execution didn't settle anything. If anything, it just opened up a whole new can of worms. The biggest question everyone's asking now is whether we should be executing people with intellectual disabilities, especially when the local prosecutors themselves are saying, "Hold up, this isn't right." Having Davidson County DA Glenn Funk publicly oppose the execution while the state attorney general pushed it through has legal experts scratching their heads about how the system is supposed to work when the government can't even agree with itself. Then there's the whole medical mess with that heart device. Attorney Kelly Henry isn't letting this go. She's planning to dig deep into the autopsy results, EKG data, and whatever information they can pull from Black's defibrillator. She wants to know exactly what role that device played in his suffering. And honestly, her findings could completely change how Tennessee handles executions going forward. So here we are, looking back at the Byron Black case and all its messy complications. When prosecutors can't agree on whether someone should die, when medical devices might be causing unnecessary torture, and when intellectual disability claims drag through courts for decades, it makes you wonder what justice actually looks like. Doesn't it? Was this the right ending to a 37-year quest for accountability after 3 brutal murders? Or did we just watch the state execute a mentally disabled man who never should have faced the death penalty? I'm curious what you think. Should intellectual disability be an automatic disqualifier for execution? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more coverage of death row cases and criminal justice issues, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These conversations about justice and mercy aren't going anywhere,